Welcome to It's a Woman's World. I'm Bonnie Pease Watkins, hosting today. My co-host today is Carleen Moores. Welcome, Carleen.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
And we have a very special guest, Christine Stark.
Thank you.
Christine is an author, a social justice activist, a frequent speaker, a visual artist, and a social work student.
Yeah.
A master's graduate school student. So among many other things, you have written a book and you're in the process of writing another book. So tell us about your book.
Yeah, my first novel came out about a year and a half ago, Nichols, A Tale of Dissociation, and it was just really a delight to write it. Although it's not, about incest and surviving incest through dissociation. It's also about a lot of other things. Love, the main character is a lesbian, athletics, girls and women's athletics. So, it hopefully is something that people will enjoy reading and also get a lot out of.
Wonderful. And it's somewhat autobiographical, is that right?
I think that's true of a lot of fiction that people write. You're drawing upon experiences that you've had in your life. But it is a fiction book set here in Minnesota and also partly in Wisconsin. And I had some similar experiences as the protagonist, but it's definitely not my life.
I know you have a special interest in prostitution, trafficking, maybe particular focus on Native women and girls and things that have been happening in Duluth. Do you want to say any more about that as an issue that's really in the news these days?
Yeah, I've been a grassroots activist and speaker and writer about issues of prostitution and trafficking for almost 25 years now, actually. Being Native and white and following Native ways, working around issues of bringing attention to the kinds of oppressions and injustices that Native women have experienced, particularly in prostitution and trafficking, is really highly important to me. I was one of the researchers and the co-authors of Garden of Truth, the prostitution and trafficking of Native women in Minnesota. And I'm also finishing up a special project I'm doing as a master level social worker student that is focusing on Native women and youth being used in prostitution and trafficking out of the Duluth Harbor on the ships up there. And so that will be released this fall.
Wonderful. And tying into that just a little bit with your book, Nichols, I know this is a very insightful book about dissociation. What is it that you would like people most to know about dissociative identity disorder? And I'm mainly thinking of the relatives, family members who have to learn to understand and deal with people with dissociative identity disorder. What is it that you would most like people to know?
Yeah, I really think it's important to talk about dissociation as a normal survival tool, and that we all experience dissociation, in one way or another. Some of us might dissociate, while we're driving our car and suddenly find ourselves 3 blocks farther than we remember. Mm-hmm. And then, it's on a continuum, and then you can have folks who have undergone extreme trauma, particularly as children, who have compartmentalized different experiences and aspects of themselves, and they may or may not have memory of certain things that they do, perhaps throughout the day or perhaps throughout the week. There's a lot of variation in dissociation, but particularly when we're talking about trauma in childhood, and then when we look at issues of prostitution and trafficking, dissociation is a major piece in that, and it's really important for people, to be able to understand it, look for it, because a lot of times, you don't even realize that that's what's happening either with yourself or with someone who might be a friend or someone you might be working with or a family member, but also to not pathologize it either, because that doesn't help anything to look at it as some kind of a frightening disorder that, makes a person mentally ill or something. So all of those pieces are really important. And when we're talking about Garden of Truth, it was like 72% of the 105 women that we interviewed had symptoms of dissociation. And so it's just...
That's a high incidence.
Yeah, it's a common experience for, women and children who have been harmed in these ways, and it's a survival strategy. When I went back and connected with Anishinaabe ways, I was told, a lot of the experience of dissociation is actually viewed as a gift that you've been given in order to survive. However, sometimes, as an adult, some symptoms of dissociation can become something that needs to be healed, and barriers need to be removed so that it's not causing people problems, because sometimes it can cause folks problems if they're losing a lot of time or not realizing some things that are happening in their lives.
Sure, and I'm very grateful that you make the distinction between where dissociation is still a coping mechanism, so it's valuable for the person, and where it can turn into it taking over, like it's someone is taking control of your mind and your body. And I'm also grateful that, Christine, you emphasize the importance of not unnecessarily pathologizing it, because that's what happens a lot. And I think people that are part of the system of the, whether it's a victim of abuse or child trafficking, need to know that it is a coping mechanism, right, that provides safety. And I think you do a great job in explaining that, both on your blog as well as in your books.
Yeah, I think Nichols, really gives people an immediate insight into, an experience that this particular character has with the dissociation, both at the time that she's being abused, and most of the book is actually focused on after the abuse and sort of how the dissociation, re-enters her life kind of over and over again until, she can start to really understand it and, heal. And actually dissociation itself can be a healing mechanism. So
That's what and I'm not sure I fully understand it yet. I need to read the book, obviously, but to me, is this the same as if I were a prostitute saying, I have to do what I'm doing, but that's not my identity? I'm not associating myself with the profession of being a prostitute, you know what I mean? Or is it really losing time and kind of more like a blackout where you really are not connecting with any aspect of reality?
Well, I think that, it's another thing that's really important is that whenever we talk about things like dissociation, whenever we talk about, post-traumatic stress disorder, those kinds of things, it's different for everyone. And so something that I see happen a lot is that people will be like, oh, you have issues with dissociation, that means you are like this.
So it's a stigma and a mental illness and all that.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's different for everyone, so it's not helpful to just sort of categorize someone and be like, well, now I know everything about you. Because some people, who have issues with dissociation, they might lose time. There might be periods of time that they don't remember because some other, aspect of themselves has sort of been engaged with that. And for other people, that's not necessarily, the case. They call it co-consciousness, so that you feel like maybe you have a, slightly younger part of yourself or something sort of engaging with the world. It's sort of like that idea of the inner child, but it's a little exaggerated, more exaggerated than that. But, it really does operate on a continuum. And, a lot of folks have been impacted by this because we have a lot of violence in our society, particularly directed at children. And as an example, Herschel Walker, if you are familiar with him, he used to play with the Vikings, and he was a world-class athlete. He wrote a book called Breaking Free, where he talks about being DID, having dissociative identity disorder. And he says that there was never any violence in his family, but that he developed this coping mechanism because he was bullied as a child for being fat. So, it's an interesting, it's a really interesting subject. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because in my work as an advocate, for people who have been traumatized, whether it was in prostitution, trafficking, pornography, childhood sexual violence, whatever, is that dissociation is a major, survival tool. And so if we're not identifying it as people who are working with people who have been victimized, and if we're not finding ways for people to help themselves understand their own dissociation, we're setting people up for failure again and again and again. So someone gets off the streets, they go through the program, but if they've got a lot of dissociation happening in their lives, they want to get off, but they're right back on there because they haven't been fully healed.
Yeah. Right. Well, tell us about you're writing a new book too now, right?
Yeah, I'm working on my second novel called Carnival Lights, and it's set in 1969, and two Native girls from a fictitious reservation in northern Minnesota leave the reservation and they end up on the streets of Minneapolis, and so it follows them through that cycle. And then there's a lot of backstory about their ancestors and sort of the reservation system that was set up and the kinds of things that happened to Indian people in the state of Minnesota and elsewhere throughout the U.S. So it's a totally different style of writing than Nichols. Nichols is really a stream of consciousness writing, so that you can really enter the mindset of the protagonist. And this is written in third-person omniscient, so you're kind of pulled back and able to see much more of the bigger picture.
Which is a true show of an expert author, if you are capable of producing so different books, so many, or not many, but such really different types of books, right? And I'm wondering what role your art plays, your drawings, in the writing, in being an activist.
Yeah, I think that we all have, motivations that we carry through life with us. And, one of my main motivations, I experienced a lot of violence growing up, so I have, a lot of firsthand experience with surviving. So I found different ways in my life to kind of process through that for myself, and activism has been one of them, and writing, and then I also do the art, and it's just a completely different way of expressing yourself. You're taken out of the mind of the word, so to speak, and it's color and it's form and content, and it's another way to release, and move through the kinds of things that have hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Do you have supporters, networks, role models for living the artist's life?
Oh, not really.
It's a lonely business in a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love doing it. So, I love to write, and, I really love doing the art. So it's just something that
creates a nice balance probably for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to have that balance. Yeah.
But I know that your research work, and probably now your classroom work, is often very collaborative, right? Your book on trafficking is written. There's about 6 authors on that one, right? So.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I mean, this was a collective effort with folks at the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and then we also worked with Melissa Farley, who's a PhD academic, and she's done a number of studies similar to what we did here, all across the world, and so it's just pretty much the consistent, numbers, the same kind of numbers coming up over and over again. 92% of the women that we talked with want to get out of prostitution immediately. 98% of our women were currently or previously homeless. 79% had been raped by an average of 4 perpetrators growing up. And then the other thing that I think is really important, too, for people to understand, because, we have these ideas, or, in the dominant society has these ideas about Native people, is that white men are the primary perpetrators against Native women. And so, that's important to talk about, too, because otherwise I think sometimes people hear those numbers and they think, oh, it's those, those Native people, kind of like that. And it's actually, indicative of a history of, attempted genocide and sexual violence perpetrated by European men against indigenous women in order to destroy, the communities and social fabric of Native people.
As we have seen in so many parts of the world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. That's kind of overwhelming information, the prevalence of prostitution and trafficking and violence against Native women in particular.